Hey guys, Steve here, just giving a quick review on the brand new Netflix series, The Midnight Gospel. The show was co-created by Duncan Trussell and Pendleton Ward. Pendleton Ward being the guy who also created the popular Cartoon Network series Adventure Time. Unlike Adventure Time though, this show is mature rated, and boy does it take advantage of that. With swearing,
fucking upload, you fucking shitbags,
heavy violence, and even the occasional bit of nudity.
So that you could truly enjoy the many orgies this world has to offer.
For those who saw the teaser trailer, this would come to no surprise. But what did come to a surprise for me, however, was the format of the show. From what little I had seen prior, I was expecting more of a Rick and Morty type of show. You know, sci-fi adventure with adult humour. But it's actually something completely different, and certainly took me a little while to catch on when watching the first episode. The show is set around a character named Clancy, who, using his multiverse simulator, which, let's face it, looks like a giant vagina, enters into various worlds and ends up interviewing an inhabitant for his Spacecast podcast. Then at the end of the episode, Clancy blows his horn and will return back to his world, reflecting on the information he has gathered. The interviews Clancy has with people takes up the main chunk of each episode, and the interviews in the show are based on the real interviews from Duncan Trussell's old podcast. In fact, there are even times during these interviews where the interviewee will refer to Duncan by his real name rather than Clancy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Annie.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
so
Duncan.
Much. You're welcome. Thank you. Duncan? Who's Duncan?
Yes. You see Duncan.
Clancy.
Oh, okay.
And in episode 6 we actually get a proper fourth wall break as we briefly see Duncan in the studio.
Okay, cut to commercial.
The format kinda reminds me of the old Creature Comfort series, where actual interviews were being used with stop motion animals animated over the top of them.
Took one look at me and said, "Oh, that's allergic reaction." He gave me my antidote and immediately my mouth just went, "Ugh." Back to normal.
Now I like what they tried to do with the show's format, but for the most part, I don't think it works, and I'll get into that in a bit. But first, I just want to touch upon the animation itself. The animation is pretty good. Initially I wasn't keen on the simplistic design and low frame rate, thinking it looked cheap. But as the episodes went on, I could see the reason for the simple design and low frame rate was so that more could be invested into creating amazing visuals with a fluid art style, giving us some amazing creativity in the various worlds, which definitely gives off Adventure Time vibes. Coupled with this trippy art style is the synthwave style music, which I particularly like the score of whenever Clancy is travelling to another world. So back to the format. In order to help these podcast segments blend in with the show, they're tied in with a narrative for each episode. Sometimes these narratives work, such as in episode 2 where we explore the concept of accepting death, whilst our characters are animals who are being put through a slaughterhouse.
Death to help you let go, go, okay, fine.
Okay.
Other times though, the connection is much looser, such as in episode 1 where the dialogue is focused on the legalization of drugs, yet the story is revolving around a zombie apocalypse. See, earlier I compared this to something like Creature Comforts, but I think Creature Comforts pulls this off better because the animation complements the dialogue. The creatures are usually picked to relate to the person being recorded, so it's a natural fit.
I mean, it's not necessarily painful, but sometimes it can be a bit uncomfortable, me sort of like pulling at their cheek sometimes to get right to the back of the teeth. So enjoy the end result. I think that's what they'd enjoy.
In The Midnight Gospel, however, the animation feels a lot more intrusive, where there can be a lot of visual gags happening while something deep and thought-provoking is being discussed in the podcast. And it kinda makes the two elements compete for the viewer's attention. And in addition to that, you also have a lot of sound effects thrown in, which again kinda distracts from the conversations being had. Now I don't know whether this was a creator or Netflix side decision, but it almost feels like they were worried that the dialogue itself wasn't going to be strong enough to hold people's attention, so they threw in a bunch of sound effects and weaved in a loose narrative in hope to keep the audience captivated. But if anything, I think all that kind of hinders it. And again, some episodes do handle this better, like episode 2 where the topic of death takes place in the slaughterhouse. We even get some quieter moments as our characters are just travelling through a tube. But for the most part, I do think there's a little bit too much clutter on screen. I wish they had dropped or at least severely reduced the sound effects, and not worried so much about each episode having a story going on in the background. Instead focusing much more on creating visuals with the animation to better personify what the speaker is discussing. Having said all that though, there was one episode that did manage to achieve this, and that's episode 8, the final episode of the series, and my god what an episode. In this episode, Clancy is chatting with his mother as they have a discussion about the circle of life and embracing the concept of death. This episode is done beautifully. Here the animation is far more fitting with what's being said and really does enhance the dialogue. There's a nice visual moment where we see Clancy and his mother walking down a hallway, where it starts with Clancy's mother supporting him as a young child, but as they age down the hallway, it ends with Clancy having to support her. This is how I wish the animation and narrative was handled for all the other episodes, where the animation can be more free and creative without being tied down to a loose plot. What makes this episode more powerful though, is that we know Clancy, or Duncan should I say, lost his mother to cancer in real life, as this line is spoken in episode 7.
Well, it's kind of too late for me. Both my parents are friends of yours, I guess you could say.
So obviously this podcast was recorded before her passing, which makes not only the topic of death more meaningful, but also the visuals too. Truly a fantastic episode, and I highly recommend checking it out. So my final thoughts. The Midnight Gospel certainly has a more unique concept than other shows. The conversations provoke deep thought, and the animation is visually creative. Sometimes these elements don't work well together and stuff can feel a little cluttered, but when they do work together, they're absolutely fantastic. I don't think this show is going to appeal to everyone, as you not only need to be on board with the idea of listening to a podcast, but you also need to be prepared for some rather crude animation. But those who it does find a niche with will certainly get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I wouldn't actually recommend starting with episode 1. Instead, I would suggest reading the synopsis for each episode to see what the main topic of discussion is, and join on that basis. I mean, there's a small overarching plot for the beginning and end segments of the episodes, but it's really not the main focus. And even if you don't plan on watching the series at all, I would at least recommend you check out episode 8, because as I stated before, that is fantastic.
I may leave this plane of existence sooner rather than later, but the love isn't going anywhere. I'm as certain of that as I am of anything.